Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Bartek Szymanski. I am here with the Across the Globe Film Festival podcast. Our guest tonight is a very, very special one. Robert Watts, who is a famed producer widely known for his work with Star Wars, the Indiana Jones film series, and 2001 Space Odyssey, working alongside directors by the names of Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Stanley Kubrick, and more. Robert, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
That's very good. I'm very happy to be here.
Robert, I wanted to say that you have a very lengthy and very fruitful career, and I would like to get to as many aspects of it as possible. But I want to start with what's probably on everybody's mind, which is you were a producer on Star Wars. Which is still widely known, still widely watched. And I think everyone is just as curious to know how did you end up on set and how was your experience on it?
I ended up on it because I knew George Lucas. George Lucas rang me and told me he was going to make this film called Star Wars and would I like to come on it? And I said, well, yeah, because I knew who George was and I really was fascinated by where we were going to go. So off we went. And we went off and made Star Wars. We made Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and then after that, we made the first of the Indiana Jones films, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then we made Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Wow. So I want to ask because I think oftentimes people associate the title of producer with possibly someone who either has money to fund a certain project or maybe has connections from the start. But it does seem like you worked your way up from being a runner to production manager to eventually becoming a producer. So for a lot of our young listeners, what is sort of the timeline and stepping stones to becoming a producer?
Well, is always a hard question I want to answer. I suppose in a sense, I did it the hard way because I worked my way up to it through all the different stages that you go through and ended up as producer, but was fortunate, of course, along the way to work with George Lucas and then Steven Spielberg. And it was a really brilliant, beginning moment for me because it got me into an area of film production that was right at the top end. And I was making films that well, were well known because they were directed by people of the likes of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. What else can I say?
Absolutely. I have to piggyback on that because, when you throw names like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, everybody's ears jump up and wonder, wow, that's amazing. And it's incredible that you worked with them. But taking into consideration the time, which I think was sort of on the hairs of the golden age of Hollywood and so forth. At the time, did those names carry as much weight as they do now, being that there was probably other directors older at the time who had a much fame to their name. So when you were working with people like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, was there a lot of pressure based on the movies that they already created, or was it more still starting out at the time?
Well, to an extent, there's always an element of starting out. And when I started to work with them, the projects that I was doing with them were new, different, and, Lucas and Spielberg type projects, which was a very useful asset. I kept on going and we made it through and we made some good movies. And I am delighted to have had that experience.
Absolutely. And I read some of your other interviews, Robert, and you did mention that some of these big films, like Star Wars, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that they weren't really big expectations. In fact, you were getting a lot of pressure from some of the production studios, such as Disney and others, who really didn't believe in the films much, probably as the director or you yourself. So, with that in mind, did it come as a surprise that these films were such a huge success, were such, high box office hits?
Yes, it did actually, because when we made Star Wars, for example, we made the film, finished it, sent it out, and when it opened, I think we were all slightly surprised by the results. But it was doing incredibly big business. The same happened with the Indiana Jones. It's really difficult to actually place myself there and say, did I know this was going to happen? Well, no, I didn't really.
Probably your responsibilities range from film to film. But could you maybe, tell our listeners, and you could use any film you'd like as an example, what were your responsibilities, whether they were on set or offset, pre-production, post-production, as a producer? Were they sort of more hands-on on everything, or did you have a very specific responsibility?
It was a bit of everything, to be absolutely honest. And, I was on set, off set, and everything that Stephen was going to need the next day, or George Lucas, or whoever was directing the film, if I was producing it, that everything they were going to need was going to be there the next day when we went to shoot.
And this includes props and everything else like that would have to be on set, correct?
Yes, it includes everything.
I read a little bit about there was some instance, if you remember, on the Indiana Jones set, where there was a lack of snakes that the director asked you to get more of.
I do remember, because if you've got the film, you'll see Steven Spielberg going, get Robert down here, we need more snakes. And he did. And Steven told me he needed more snakes. I had to get the snakes. So I went to the guy who supplied some of the snakes. They were here in England. The snakes were actually all came from Amsterdam in Holland. These are the kind of things that you become confronted with, kind of impossible solutions. Somehow you had to find the answer.
I can only imagine how someone can ask you to get a number of snakes in a short amount of time. So, I give you all credit. I'm still not sure how you were able to transport, snakes from Amsterdam to England, for a film set. I hope these snakes weren't venomous or poisonous, were they?
No, they were, most of them were not. We had one or two kind of viper type snakes, but most of them were not poisonous, and they were all right.
And I wanted to ask you if there were any other particular experiences you remember from either Indiana Jones or Star Wars, or any film for that matter, where you had sort of these kinds of experiences that would be odd to the normal person.
Well, every film has its experiences because they're in the script when you get it. And I suppose on the Indiana Jones films, the cutting of the rope bridge, which we did in Sri Lanka, was the one thing that was unusual in the sense that it was unique to that film.
And can you expand a little bit more about that when you talk about the ropes?
This was for Indiana Jones, and we actually put the bridge in over a narrow canyon in the mountains in Sri Lanka, and we used 7 cameras, because that's all I had, every single camera that I had, to shoot a different angle, so that when we finally got the shots, we had 7 different angles of the cutting of the rope bridge.
Oh, wow. Where were you building the bridge?
It was actually a set, but it was out in the wilds. So it wasn't a studio kind of set. It was a location set, because we built a rope bridge across a canyon and we cut it down.
Wow. Well, I mean, we know Sri Lanka it's an island nation off the coast of India. Were you filming, in a real jungle with, animals and all that kinds of stuff as we see in Indiana Jones?
Well, we were and we weren't. Whatever we had with us, we brought there. We had some animals, but in this particular case, we had dummies that fell from the rope bridge as it was cut. But the difference with them was that they were not dummies that were inanimate. They were animated so that as they fell from the rope bridge, they kicked as they fell down into the river below. Steven Spielberg wanted them to look like real people falling. And so you can't just have an inanimate dummy falling, because that's all you'll get.
How was it filming in the jungle or in Sri Lanka in general? I mean, were you dealing with a hot environment? Was it something you weren't used to, or something that you at that time already had experience working with? Because I can imagine, working on a set is one thing, let alone another country, but environment like a jungle must be something eye-opening for someone who has never been.
It would be, because the climate was actually somewhat hotter than England. And
Can
so
imagine.
we had to get used to it. And we went out there and we shot there, and it worked okay. It wasn't that hot in the sense that it was hot, but I've been in hotter places, let's put it that way, of filming. And it was just difficult because it was jungle, dummies, cutting a rope bridge, all those kind of things you don't do in normal life.
Quite an amazing story, especially for a series that's known and stuck in the hearts of many to have a story like that. I sort of just want to start from the beginning in terms of, I guess, your inspiration with films, and did you set out to become a producer, or did you have your eyes set on something else, whether it was within the film industry or with something else?
I always wanted to work in the film industry. My grandfather had been a script writer at Ealing Studios in London, and he helped me to get a job. And as a result, I didn't want to let him down, so I did the best possible job I could. And I think I did quite well, because I continued to get employed.
Probably with some of the jobs that you had, even before you became producer, required you to travel to certain places. Were there any locations that you remember that you had some experiences with, or any locations that you just truly absolutely loved to be there, to be on set, to experience it all?
I went all around the world, all these different places, and had a lot of very varied experiences. And all in all, I have no complaints. It was great. Windsor, where we were shooting on The Empire Strikes Back in snow, freezing cold. I don't want to go and work in the cold like that, because I don't particularly like the cold. But hey, I didn't mind the heat. So I didn't mind working in the tropics. But please don't send me off to do long locations in sub-zero temperatures.
But moving a little bit forward, I wanted to ask you, Robert, what would your advice be to, let's say, a young production assistant or manager, maybe a job that's sort of similar to what you had? What your advice would be to them when they're starting out and having these sort of odd tasks to deal with on set?
The easiest way I could describe it is to stay focused, believe in yourself, be prepared for anything, and trust those with whom you are working. It's important to do all those things. And the fact is that you create that environment yourself before you go. But when you get there, you better be ready, because there's nowhere you can go apart from where you are.
Right. I definitely agree with you on that. Do you think jobs that you had sort of still exist today, or do you think it was very particular for the era that you worked in, or do you think that these types of things and hassles here and there still happen on set?
I think they still happen on set. I can't believe it's changed that much, because technology has changed. Yes, you can do things before and afterwards that maybe we couldn't do at that time. But it still has to be prepared for and made ready for, and you still have to go out and shoot it, which is what we had to do. For example, Roger Rabbit, which I did, that was really difficult because we didn't have the equipment to deal with the technology that we were attempting to do. And hey, we did it. It worked out. We made it work. We did what we had to do, but it was difficult. It was the most difficult film I'd done at that time in my career. There's no technology today that would make it easier.
What was some of the technology that you guys had difficulty working with, or didn't have the technology to work with?
With Roger Rabbit, for example, we were mixing animation and live action, so that we were making a film that assumed that animation was real, and that you went out and shot it, as opposed to that's not the way it works at all. You actually have to do it afterwards. And that's how we did it. We made it look as if it was being done at the time, utilizing a technology that didn't exist. It was tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly agree with you. And, going back to, someone like yourself in this position, what it entails, and even with technology that's improved so much over the course of the years, there are still jobs and things that need to be done that technology just simply can't take care of. My next question is maybe almost a little selfish, speaking as an actor, but I'm really curious about your experience with actors working on set. I know your job wasn't maybe specifically to work directly with them, but I'm sure you would have had to been around them, possibly interacting with them, or in the end, somehow working with them. I just wanted to ask you about any particular experiences you've had with actors, whether they're well-known names or not, that you sort of recall or remember fondly.
Yes, of course. Actors are a huge part of what we do. The films are made up by the actors, and I worked with many actors over the years, and I am delighted to say that I had a really good experience. Harrison Ford, for example, I did 6 films with him, and we became great friends, because when you do a film with that complexity together, you become friends simply because you have to, and it was great.
That's wonderful. What was your relationship with Harrison Ford like? Was it, I mean, was it simply work based, or were there times where, the crew and the cast sort of went out and, anything like that happened?
It wasn't only work based, obviously. We worked together all day. But at the end of the day, when we wrapped and we had the time off before being back on the set the next day, that's the time that one had a private life to an extent. And that's the time when, hey, I used to see Harrison because he was a good friend. I did 6 films with him. Sunday lunch and then that sort of traditional family meal. One Sunday, I had all the cast round for Sunday lunch. And Harrison was there too, along with Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. And none of them had had an English Sunday lunch before. So it was quite a treat to have them there and to enjoy it with them.
That's very nice to hear. And for our mostly American audience, can you tell us a little bit about what an English lunch entails?
Oh, it's when you generally have something like roast beef with Yorkshire pudding and vegetables and nice pudding and all kinds of things like that. Oh, and gravy. I mean, what you have basically is a roast dinner, as it would be called in America. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, of course, of course. Well, it all sounds very delicious, and I hope to be a part of an English Sunday lunch one day. And I'm sure Mr. Harrison Ford had a delightful time within your hospitality. I wanted to ask you how you really feel, where the movie industry is going today, whether it's, as we spoke about, with technology, or with casting, or the length of films, or how films are sort of being translated to television today. Is there anything that you particularly feel strong about, whether it's criticism or whether it's positive commentary?
Well, my feeling is it's going the right way because the film industry has always been a part of entertainment coming out of theatre, etc., and eventually ending up on the big screen. And it still is today, and I believe it will be many years to come. I really enjoy being part of that world, and I wouldn't swap my world for any other world.
Well, I'm going to put your answer to the test in my next question, if you'll allow me. I wanted to ask you if you never had the opportunity to become what you did, let's say in a world maybe where movies didn't exist, what do you think would be or would have been your next career choice?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because my next career choice, given a situation where the world that I went into did not exist, would certainly have been in the world of entertainment, in the world that was creative like that. That's the way I've always done my work. And I would like to think I still would have ended up in a creative realm, doing entertainment in some manner or another.
I'll take your answer as that you would have been like to been an actor possibly.
Yes.
It is in the creative field. Usually at the end of the podcast, we ask our guest what their favorite movie of all time is. And being that you have had the experience of working on some of the best films or on films that people would say is their favorite, I'll ask you to put aside the films that you worked on and what would be your favorite film of all time, apart from the ones that you have worked on or have had some sort of association with.
Oh, The Wages of Fear. That's a French film.
The Wages of Fear.
I remember seeing that, and I was very impressed by it. It was directed by a guy called Henri-Georges Clouzot, who would go on to be dubbed the French Hitchcock. And it starred Yves Montand, Charles Vanel, and Vera Clouzot. It's a wonderful film for its time.
I just want to say how grateful we are to have had you, because you are a very unique guest. I mean, not only working with the people you worked with, but some of the extraordinary tasks you had, which a lot of people I think will find not only entertaining but very interesting, very intriguing to what happens in the entertainment industry behind the scenes, and how everything is not as easy as it may seem when you're sitting down in the movie theater, watching everything go down on screen.
It's been great to do this with you.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it.